I will be on.
And Anne, I think we are live, so you can go ahead and get started.
Okay, welcome everyone to the Ukiah Unified School District Special Board Meeting. Today, May 21st, 2020. We have called this special meeting in response to the budget changes that all came as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. So as authorized by the governor's emergency executive order on March 12th of this year, we are conducting this meeting via video conference, and it's being live streamed on UUSD YouTube channel. And then the special meeting, board meeting, is following the rules as laid out in the Brown Act. So our opening item is our call to order, and if Ms. Ornelas could conduct our roll call.
Okay, Trustee Fernandez.
Here.
Trustee Barrett.
Here.
Trustee Diaz.
Here.
Trustee Nelson.
Here.
Trustee Van Sant.
Here.
Trustee Arkin.
Here.
And President Mulgard.
Thank you. Here. Now we'll do our flag salute. Please rise. There's our flag. Ready? Begin. I pledge allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible,
with liberty and justice.
liberty and justice for all.
Thank you to the Cracker Jack IT crew for providing our flag and all of our streaming support. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
I so move.
Moved by Trustee Nelson,
I second.
seconded by Trustee Barrett. All those in favor?
Aye.
Are there any opposed?
Aye.
Okay, hearing none. We have no other business since this is a special meeting. And so we are going to just plunge into our discussion on the budget reductions we heard about less than a week ago on May 14th at the May revise that Governor Newsom introduced. And our fiscal and administrative staff have been working furiously since then to come up with some things for us to consider today, and then with a look at what we're going to be needing to consider before the end of this school year and then this fall. So we kind of have three decision-making times: today, later before we submit this budget, and then again in the fall. So I'll turn it over to you, Superintendent Cuban.
Yes, so I am just going to provide the board kind of a big picture overview. You requested that we bring back some policy guidance for the board that we can use as we consider future budget reductions. So in the background of your this agenda item, we have outlined what the issue is. We are receiving currently for next year a 7.92% reduction to our local control funding formula, which includes the base grant and supplemental concentration grant funds. So both of those will receive that reduction. When we shared with you at our last board meeting, we did not have a lot of detail at the time. Since then, our fiscal team has attended school services workshop, and they've given more detail, not all the detail yet. So we're still waiting on a couple of details. But what we anticipate is the following: the 7.92% reduction results in a $6.3 million reduction to our budget next year. And that includes, again, both the supplemental concentration grant funding and the base grant. The total of the two is over $6.3 million in a reduction. In addition to the LCFF, we are getting a reduction to our after-school program. It's about a 15% reduction. And these are the numbers that we're approximating because the state has not yet come out with 100%, given us a number yet. So it's about a 15% reduction. Our adult ed block grant is getting a reduction of about $100,000. Career technical education grant, remember at the last meeting, we told you that we actually got the grant. Well, it's getting reduced by about 50%. So, and that appears in the hit to supplemental and concentration grant funding. So, so anyway, yay, we got the grant, but it's reduced by 50%. The ag incentive grant, we receive a very small dollar amount for this grant. It's about a 50% reduction. I want to say what we get for the ag incentive grant is about $16,000. It funds, you know, materials and supplies related. There are no people funded there. And then the K-12 Strong Workforce Grant we did receive, and I have good news on that. We are actually, because we are funded, it's funded technically from this year. We're actually getting our full funding amount. That's the grant. It's about $700,000 that we'll be receiving to support the further development of career technical education pathways in our district. So that's good news. We just got that news today. So we can sort of take that off the list of a 50% reduction. And so then in order to make these reductions, the challenge, as we all know, is we're not sure yet what school is going to look like in the fall. So in the past, when we've had to reduce the budget, we did not have so many unknowns. Tyler, did you have a question?
Before we got too far away from the reductions, Deb, I'm sorry for butting in. Are these permanent reductions, or are they going to pay us later for what they're taking away now, or what is that? What do those reductions look like long term?
Right now, they're permanent reductions. You know, we're also getting some cash deferrals, like our June payment we're going to receive in July. But luckily, we have enough cash on hand to be able to deal with that problem. So they're doing a variety of things, including cash deferrals for next year. So we need to watch our cash flow. The fiscal department will continue to watch cash flow to make sure we're okay there. But this is an ongoing reduction. It's not a one-time reduction. So our proposed policy solution, and you're certainly welcome to modify it, is based on the idea that we have about 3 weeks to make decisions, and Megan brought that up at the last meeting. We have a ton of uncertainty in the fall. We don't know what school is going to look like yet. We don't know how this pandemic is going to continue to unfold. We're also hoping that the federal government will give states funding that might help us, but we won't know that right now. We probably won't know more on those things until August or September. So we're recommending the following. One is the board asked what sort of policy document should we be looking at when we're making reductions? Administration and staff feel strongly that we should be using the strategic plan focus document as a really good policy document to make decisions about reductions. However, we also feel strongly that when we're thinking about reductions, I've listed a few groups of positions that are not necessarily super clear in that 2-page document that I think should guide us. And it's in the background document, but we should make sure that we continue to fund general education and special education teachers, technology support positions, because we know next year we may or may not be in and out of remote learning. We really need our tech people to continue to support the district. Positions that support health and school sanitation. So it would not be a good idea to reduce custodians, for example, because we need to make sure our schools are appropriately sanitized to deal with the virus. And then also we feel strongly that positions that support social emotional well-being of our students are really critical at this time. So we can help continue to provide counseling to our students. So with that being said, to help with this budget problem, we're proposing that any positions outside of those categories, and again, the board may want to add to that, that we would keep those vacant in the next school year as they are vacated. So if we have a vacant teacher on special assignment position, for example, somebody leaves the district, we would leave that vacant for the next school year. And we'd figure out how to cover that, those job duties at that particular school site. So that would create savings for next year that would compound into the following year if we continued keeping that vacant. And that the superintendent, would review each and every position, determine whether or not to fill it. And just knowing that too, I'll just put a little asterisk there, with special education, outside of classroom teachers, we have particular requirements for students based on their IEPs. So we would want to continue to fund those positions that are legally required: speech and language therapists, school psychologists, instructional assistants with special ed, those types of positions. We would want to make sure and continue to hire.
Hold on.
Yep.
Question, Trustee Fernandez?
I was wondering a little bit of clarification on the general education teachers. Are you including all of our TOSAs in general education teachers?
I am not. I'm including teachers who are teaching. When I think about that, I think about teachers who are providing direct instruction to students in the classroom. So if you had a first grade teacher vacancy at your school, we would definitely, and we have kids to fill that classroom, we definitely fill that first grade teacher position. But if a TOSA position opens up, and currently we have 2.25 vacant TOSA positions, we would not fill those for next year until we can make some decisions on what to do.
What about some of the new positions? Maybe you're going to get there, that we talked about that we actually had approved and we were going forward because we thought we had money. Are you looking at those as well, and not necessarily? So
we'll get to those in a minute, Zoe. So hold on to that for just a sec. So in a minute, I'm going to have Steve talk about using some one-time funds in the budget to fill the gap for next year. So he's got a spreadsheet that he's going to share and go through all of that. Do you want me to pause, Ann, and answer questions, or do you want?
No, I think I'll just rudely interrupt you whenever I see a hand.
That sounds good.
Trustee Van Zandt?
This is just related to Trustee Fernandez's question. Do you consider the reading teachers general ed because they're providing direct instruction, or are they not considered general ed?
I would consider them providing direct instruction to students. I've messed around with that language a lot, Megan, and they are providing intervention support. And I think with learning loss that we expect students to have, those positions are really critical.
Okay, that's fine. I just didn't know what you were calling them.
I should probably clarify that language and put something about direct instruction in there.
I even think that might be, because there's some SSCs who might think they do direct instruction. You may need to be even more clear. I'm not sure.
Yeah, and to clarify, we're not recommending that we lay those positions off right now.
I understand.
We're just recommending that we leave them unfilled, and it will create some budget savings that will compound.
But you're not recommending that we leave the reading teachers unfilled?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yep.
It's a perfect kind of question to be asking, because at the end of this, we're going to end up with this document, and this is the document that's going to happen unless we change it.
That's correct.
So these questions are great.
Yep, they are awesome. Okay, and then we would implement the plan that Steve's going to lay out to you in just a minute when I'm finished going through all of this. Including implementing up to $750,000 in reductions to supplemental and concentration grant funds for next year through both not filling open positions and then reducing materials budgets and outside contractors. We are going to come back to you with a detailed plan on that. But an example would be, we've spent about $49,000 a year on library books. So we would not spend that $49,000 next year. We would not do things like provide art materials money or contract with guest artists, things like that. But we want to come back to you with that when we think we're going to need to have one more special board meeting to really deal with that supplemental and concentration grant, those recommendations that we're going to bring forward. So we'll talk about that in the end, but we think we're going to need to have one more. But that's an idea. We get about 750,000. Now we're getting reduced 1.4 million out of supplemental and concentration grant funding. So we'd reduce about half of that for next year, and knowing that the following year we would have to reduce more.
Okay, you don't have to remember any of this. Steve is going to walk us through all this.
Yes. And it's also in your background there too. Ukiah Adult School is going to reduce their budget by the required amount, which is about $100,000. And I should have put this one before the bullet that's last. We're not planning to fill any open administrator positions that are currently open. We have 1.5 FTE of administrative positions that are open. We would not fill those. And I would figure out how we would cover those services. We have a 1.0 FTE special ed coordinator position that has been posted for a while. We have been unable to fill it. And then we have a 0.5 UISA principal position that we would shift our administrators around to get that covered as well. So any administrator position we would not fill for the next year. We have 1.5. And so that would be about 150, I'm ballparking right now, about $150,000 savings for next year. So I use these examples only to show you that our plan is to use a combination of one-time money in addition to not filling vacancies, so that we do not have to do layoffs this summer of our staff. We are able to open up a layoff window for certificated staff this summer because of the current budget conditions, but we're not proposing that we do that under this plan. The last thing I will say before Steve goes through that detailed document with you that's attached, we also are going to receive some federal one-time funding. Zoe, do you have?
I'm wondering what's attached. I don't see that there's a spreadsheet attached. Is there?
There should be.
Yes.
Where attached to the agenda?
It was attached at about 2 o'clock.
Zoe, I just accessed them from the email. There's two pieces. There's only two one-page pieces of paper.
That's correct. And so we're also going to be receiving some one-time funding to assist us with expenses related to the pandemic. We estimate it to be about $1.4 million. The intention of that funding is to be able to provide additional academic supports, and also to try and mitigate learning loss, to provide wraparound services to students, to support their social emotional well-being, and quote unquote additional supports. So we don't know what that means yet. It's all brand new information. We are not including that as part of this particular solution. But just know that we will have some funding in the fall to be able to supplement students in their education, also to be able to provide buy any safety related supplies as we reopen, hand sanitizer, masks, personal protective equipment, etc. So that's what the intention of that funding is. But it's not included in this mix. Trustee Diaz?
Okay, I was muted. Okay, now that you're speaking about supplies for combating or actually keeping school sites clean and disinfected, I know there's a shortage of all those things. Are you trying to get orders now so that we get them? We get some supply in the
We are. Most
Good.
definitely. Gabe is actively, we do have some things on hand, but we're likely going to need more. So he is actively working to get us more supplies. That topic has come up in our Office of Emergency Services calls for the last 3 weeks as well. And, you know, the more we can advocate with our lawmakers around prioritizing education, the better off we're going to be in being prioritized for supplies. So we need to get decisions made by June 5th so that fiscal can build everything into a budget and bring it to you by June 18th. That's why I mentioned that we really do need to have one more meeting. I'm sorry. I'm not a fan of special meetings, but these are crazy times. And before we get to the end of the discussion, I do want Steve to walk you through the plan that fiscal put together. And then we'll open it up for discussion and questions and see how you might want to modify this other two-page document.
Okay, so just to be clear, we have 3 decision points. One is decision point number 1, any monetary changes we can make to what Steve goes over, fine, but also the 2-page policy document about how decisions will be made over the near future. So that's number 1. Number 2 is going to be our special meeting that occurs before June 18th. And then number 3 will be in the fall, because Steve will also go over the effect on our 21-22 budget as well.
Absolutely. So Steve's going to share his screen. Steve, we need to have somebody make you. Ian, can you make Steve a co-host?
Certainly, give me 2 seconds.
And by the way, while you're taking your 2 seconds, I just want you to know how amazing you are. Our technology department is just amazing. And Ian, we appreciate everything that you do to help us with our board meetings and everything else. Ian is the face behind the UUSD logo.
Steve should be a co-host now.
Trustee Fernandez, were you able to access the document?
Yeah, I think I was looking, it hadn't been up. Yes, I got on my email. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Mr. Barrickman.
Great, thank you. So just briefly, these next few months and possibly years are going to be extremely difficult for the district financially. But it's very fortunate that through your stewardship, along with the administrative team, that we are in a pretty good position to at least weather this first year without having to make a lot of dramatic cuts. It gives us time to be strategic and make thoughtful, careful decisions rather than making knee-jerk decisions that hurt the district in the long term. So I'm very fortunate, I think, to be here at a time when you have that groundwork laid for us. So thank you for that. So the first document I want to share with you is if you printed them out, there are 2 pages of financial numbers. One is a landscape page. That's where we're going to start. So when last we talked about budget, which was in March, which seems like years ago to me at this point, was second interim. We were showing you a budget that projected us to be finishing the 2021-22 year with reserves less than the 9% that you want. And that wasn't a surprise given our conservative nature of budgeting, the salary increases we had just given, and things like that. We knew that we were going to drop below the 9% on paper at second interim. But we thought as we closed the books this year, we would bring that back up, at least for 21-22, and perhaps even for 22-23. Then the world changed on us. And so now the story's a little bit different. But so I want to walk you through kind of where we are in closing the books for this year and talk about next year in a lot of detail. So here we go. For 19-20, we've had 3 pretty significant changes to our budget from last we talked. The first is that our LCFF revenue, which is the primary piece of our revenue funding for the district, it's about 80% of our revenue comes through the local control funding formula. Our P2ADA came in about 40 higher than we projected at second interim. That means an extra $500,000 to the district for 19-20 in revenue, about $394,000 in base and another $120,000 in SCG funds. As we've started closing the books, we've already identified reductions to expenditures. So on line 2, you see that we're going to spend at least $110,600 less than we projected at second interim. I think when all is said and done, that number will be much higher, but that's the amount we can concretely identify right now. Line 3, we talk about the fact that it appears the Child Nutrition Fund will not require a contribution from the general fund when it closes the books for 2019-20. We had budgeted a $273,000 contribution. We don't think that's going to be necessary, which is definitely good news. Kudos to the child nutrition team for making that happen. As we move into 2020-21, line 5 shows you the loss of almost $4 million in revenue that the superintendent referenced a few minutes ago, almost $5 million in base, and about 1.4 million in supplemental and concentration funds. Those numbers are still estimated. We don't even have the new calculator to use to calculate our revenues for next year exactly yet. That's supposed to come out sometime next week, but that's our best estimate at this time. Now, lines 6 through 9 are basically placeholders. There's still a lot of information we do not have for 2020, 2021. Line 6 talks about the federal funds like Title I, Title II, Title III, the Perkins Grant, things like that. We have no guidance on what to expect in terms of revenue changes for next year. So we can assume that the revenue will be the same. We can assume a conservative decrease, which is typically what we do. We assume that it'll drop by about 10%. But if it drops more than that, we may have to fill part of that hole that creates. The same thing with state categoricals. Like there is a reduction to the ACES program. We're assuming that program will still live within its means. It'll fully fund itself, but it's possible we may have to make a contribution to help cover it. It's also possible when the budget gets adopted in June that categoricals that have not been identified yet may be reduced. That will leave us scrambling to adjust to those changes as well. Line 8 talks about the contribution to adult ed. We believe that there won't be a required contribution beyond what we've always done. But again, changes could happen to the state budget that could require a little bit more of a contribution. Line 9 talks about preschools. We know that preschool is taking a double hit for next year. One, the number of seats that districts are allowed to have is being reduced, and the per student funding is being reduced as well. Now, again, we assume that the preschools will be able to adjust and adapt and fully fund themselves, but it's possible there will be a contribution required from the general fund. For now, we don't think so, so that's why those are all zeros. Okay, so moving into some cost reductions for 2020-21. Right off the bat, we believe we can reduce the supplemental concentration grant funding expenditures by at least $750,000. We talked about that a few minutes ago, and we believe that number is a pretty solid number and might even improve over time. One piece of good news for school districts in the state budget proposal is that the STRS and PERS contributions will be decreased for 2020-21 and beyond. That will save the district over $500,000 next year from what we had budgeted at second interim. Another piece of good news we received yesterday is that our workers' comp rate is dropping by 0.4% for next year. 0.4% doesn't sound a lot, but it's actually $140,000 in savings over what we projected previously. Moving on to line 14, we are required to make a 3% of our general fund contribution to routine restricted maintenance every year. The state is going to allow us to exclude one categorical program from that calculation. That will lower the contribution required by almost $77,000. That'll still leave plenty of money in routine restricted maintenance for them to do what they need to do. It just saves the general fund a little bit of a contribution. From there, we start moving into some programs the district has put in place over time, starting with textbook adoption. So we are proposing to suspend the textbook adoption contributions for 2020-21 and 2021-22 and beyond. That will reduce by $442,500 each year, those contributions. We're also going to propose borrowing the balance in the textbook adoption monies, which is almost $2.7 million. We want to borrow that back for the time being to help us bridge this gap. We want to suspend the $300,000 contribution to deferred maintenance and take back the deferred maintenance money that is sitting there, $186,173. That, coupled with line 19, we want to borrow back the one-time facilities monies that the board had put aside, gives us $1.3 million to help us weather this storm. Fortunately, we have the bond that just passed that we'll be able to use to fund anything that comes up in the short term. We'll be able to deal with that through those funds and free up these general fund dollars. We also want to suspend the contribution to safety equipment and vehicle replacement, $100,000. On the books, there was a contribution to Title I that did need to be there for $3,400 each year. We can take that back. And again, we believe the cafeteria fund will not require a contribution in 2021 or beyond. So bringing that money back as well. So you see on line 23, all those expense reductions add up to $6.2 million. That almost covers that loss in revenue on line 10, comes up just $100,000 short.
Steve?
So again, through the reserves we had and things, we're able to weather the storm in the short term. Sorry, did somebody have a question?
Trustee Nelson?
Thank you both. What does borrowing the money mean? What does that actually mean?
Well, theoretically, when again things get healthier again, as they always do for school districts, it's always cyclical. We will have money again at some point. The board may choose to put that money back into the deferred maintenance fund, to put that money back into the textbook adoption fund, things like that. We're not assuming we're just taking it for now. We're using the term borrowing.
Trustee Fernandez?
Don't we have to purchase new textbooks at a certain, isn't there like a period of time that we have to do new adoptions?
Yes, there is, but we'll also have lottery instructional materials money that we are being told will still come in at about the same level next year. So we think while we're doing the adoption next year, while we're doing the pilot program next year, there won't be a lot of cost. The cost will come a year after. We'll have lottery money. We'll have things to help address it at that time.
Katie Summer, did you want to address that issue?
Yes, both what Steve said, we do have lottery funds and we're still proposing to keep the funding for textbooks in SCG as well. And then we'll just, in the past, the state has suspended some of the adoptions. We don't know if that will happen, but we just have to get back on our cycles.
How many things were scheduled for this upcoming school year?
What was scheduled to pilot this year was the elementary science adoption.
So what would we do instead?
With the SCG, we probably have enough funding to continue that if we want to, or we can postpone it for another year.
But you specifically had an employee that you were keeping to make that pilot transition, right?
Correct.
So it wouldn't really make any sense to keep the person without the materials.
If we decide to not move forward with the adoption or the pilot for next year.
Would that be something that would come back to the board?
Katie, are you saying that we're not going to pilot the science materials next year?
No, I'm saying we could choose to wait. We have enough in SCG to do the purchase for the science adoption.
Well, I think it would be a good idea to move forward because, we're going to eventually need to adopt social studies. And if we wait a year, it's just going to back us up more.
Yep, I agree.
Good. Okay. So other questions for Steve at this point on the one pager before we go on to the next document that is a multi-year? Trustee Fernandez?
So I was wondering about some of the things on the strategic plan that the strategic plan that were new for this year. Are they, Deb, you said we're going to get to those. Are they in here? Are they not in here? I'm wondering, are we going to move forward with them? Or are we going to wait? Like the restorative justice classrooms, the STEM teacher.
Trustee Fernandez, we have filled a couple of those positions, but not all of them. So for example, we have filled the STEM TOSA position. And if we were to pull that back, we'd want to do like a summer layoff process. We've also filled the we are close to filling the high school restorative justice classroom. We've done the interviews. They're just waiting to get the go-ahead to make a job offer. We'd like to move forward with that because it will create a vacancy elsewhere in this supplemental concentration grant funding that we wouldn't fill. At Eagle Peak, we probably will leave the alternative to suspension classroom vacant for next year because we have not been able to fill that with a viable candidate so far. So we would probably hold on that one. We also have an open counseling position that we have not filled yet. We'd like to, but we're kind of waiting on this policy document on that. So we've done a few and have not done others. And we would share all that with you when we come back to our special meeting so you can just see the whole picture of it.
Other questions on this document? Steve, since we know we're getting the 1.4 million in additional academic and social emotional support from the feds, why wasn't that put in up there with lines 1 through 4?
Timing as much as anything. We're still trying to understand the programmatic rules of how we can spend that money and whether that would replace existing expenditures or that would be all new, help us fund new initiatives that aren't currently budgeted.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
And that's a good reminder that this is all, the information we're presenting tonight is always a point in time. And by the time we print this, something could have changed, right? It's
Yeah.
the best information we had available at a certain point in time.
Okay. Okay, so then we're going to go on to the multi-year projection.
Right, so the second page, the one that is the portrait, tries to it takes our unrestricted general fund, multi-year projections at second interim, so back in March, and folds in all the information that we just saw on this other page and tries to help us understand what does it look like when all is said and done. We do not have 2022-23 projected on this document yet. That will be part of the budget package next month. It was just too soon for us to get that folded into this document. So starting with the revenues, you see the first red item between lines A1 and A2 is the increase in revenue this year of 503,000, and then the decrease in revenue in 2021 and 21-22. Moving down slightly to row 3 of the expenditures, you see we've added in the STRS and PERS reductions and the workers' comp reduction. Moving down to line 7, you see that we were able to reduce 110,000 in expenditures this year that we've already identified. And we believe we can reduce SCG expenditures of 750,000 in 2021 and 21-22. I'm going to skip the yellow highlighted lines for a minute and I'll come back to them. If we go on down a little further into the other financing sources uses section, section D, you see after line 1B, eliminating the cafeteria fund transfer out. Again, we believe the cafeteria fund will be able to not require a contribution from the general fund. Then below line 3, you see a lot of the other changes we talked about. You see the decrease. So a positive number here is a decrease to the contribution to routine restricted maintenance.
Hey, Steve.
Yes.
Can you share your screen, please?
I apologize. I thought it was shared. Okay, let's try that again. Ah, is that better?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, I apologize. All right, so going back up the top briefly, between lines A1 and A2, you can see the increase and the decreases to revenue that I referenced. In the expenditure section below line 3, you see the STRS and PERS and workers' comp reductions in 2021 and 21-22. Below line 7, you see the expense reductions we talked about this year and through SCG in the next 2 years. Then we'll come back to the yellow lines in just a second. And scrolling down again, you see the reductions in the transfers out to the food service program and the changes to the contributions we make from the unrestricted general fund. So if you scroll down now to the bottom of that page, so now at the end of 2021-22, we project to have reserves of 7.44%, up from 6.51% that we projected at second interim. Again, that's still less than 9%, but I believe once we finish closing the books on 2019-20, the 2021 reserves will be over 9%.
And now for the bad news.
Right, because we have not put any reductions in here yet. Any reductions that we saved from this year, any reductions from next year, you don't see those reflected yet. So to get 2021-22 back to a 6% reserve will require reductions of 1.7 million just to get us back to 3%, then another almost 2.5 million to get us back to 6% at the end of 21-22. So that's
a total of like 4 million something dollars.
4.2 million in reductions, correct. So that's where, but that's again based on a set of assumptions today. There's a HEROES Act that's been proposed at Washington. If that gets signed, most of these reductions go away with a signature of a pen. Other things could happen in the meantime that could make this better, or conversely could make it worse. It's again the information we know today before we put any reductions in that we're going to start working on.
And I'll just add there, Steve, first of all, thank you all so much for your thinking about this. And I'm never really one to use one-time solutions to an ongoing problem. But in this case, because there is so much uncertainty right now and into the fall, I think this plan makes a lot of sense. But again, we know that when we hit the fall, we're going to be having to do a lot of really hard work together with all of us and with our stakeholders to identify additional reductions. And just to emphasize what Steve said, this next year's budget doesn't include any reductions that we're going to achieve naturally. For example, the 1.5 FTE manager positions are not in here as a savings. So that'll compound over 2 years. So anyway, you'll see some, this should improve. And hopefully it'll improve dramatically with more funding, but we feel like this is the best approach considering our circumstances that we're all under right now.
Okay.
Deb, I've got a question about the, it just slipped my mind. With the program that Pomolita started to, I can't remember what the official name is.
The Restorative Justice Classroom.
I'm wondering, that was kind of an expensive project. I think we were all pretty excited about because of some of the successes that Pomolita had shared with us. And it sounds like it's rolling forward well at the high school. I'm just wondering if that $100,000+ we're spending there is something we actually want to take on for. Just don't know if it's a smart thing to do right now.
Did you plant that question, Superintendent Hewitt?
I did not plant that question, but I do have an answer.
But she's very prepared.
I feel fine about it, Trustee Nelson, because the high school is willing to not fill their 2.0 student success coordinator TOSA positions to be able to have that. So they currently have 3 SSCs at the high school because of their size, and they would go down to 1. They feel like that position is incredibly important to their campus. And so they're willing to give to have it.
And then at Eagle Peak?
At Eagle Peak, those programs, they're super dependent on finding the right personnel for those classrooms. And currently they haven't found the right match. And so it makes sense to leave it open. We're already almost in June. And to be able to find the right match for that type of teacher, it becomes more difficult as time goes on. And so we're all comfortable leaving that open for a year, not completely taking it off the books, trying again to get it filled in a year, but we're all comfortable leaving it open. We did have a leadership meeting today, and we had all of these discussions about all of this. So anyway, that's where things are, Trustee Nelson.
Trustee Barrett, were you motioning or did you have a question? Oh, wait, you're on mute. Carolyn, you're on mute.
That's what I was doing. I muted myself. What I was wondering, and I don't have our 2-page document in front of me, but didn't we have some math supports that we were adding for next year? And I was wondering what's happening with those.
Yes, we do have those, and we are planning to move forward with those.
Okay.
We discussed that today with the principals as well. There are some paraprofessional support positions that are funded out of supplemental and concentration grant funding, and we can still continue to fund those while achieving savings in other places. We really tried to use that 2-page document in our discussions. It was extremely helpful. So I appreciate the board's suggestion at the last meeting that we do that.
I would also just like to add that I really appreciate the thoughtful work that has gone into this, and it just, I mean, just this being foisted on you suddenly. And obviously, I think that our previous work with the strategic plan has really helped, but the work that Steve and his staff has put into this, the rest of you, Katie and you, Deb, it's much appreciated.
It's like they didn't have anything else that they were doing, and all of a sudden this comes up. Trustee Fernandez and then Van Sant.
You can go to Van Sant first. I don't really much.
I didn't want to interrupt the flow of the meeting, but so if you're going to answer this later, Deb, or maybe you already did, because I might have been spacing out. How did this go over with your leadership team in terms of using the strategic plan as a document and the principles that you came up with? Was that something they're on board with, or should we expect concern from leadership or either of our bargaining units? Do you know? I
do know that as well. We actually met with our bargaining unit presidents, our CSEA president and our UTA president today, and they are on board with this plan that preserves people and appreciate using the strategic plan document as a guiding document. And then we also met with our administrative council group today that has about 39 people on it, and they were all on board as well. Okay. So do you feel like you have enough stakeholder input to move forward? I do. If we were making some dramatic reductions, I would want to get some more stakeholder input, but I believe that this approach, I don't think that I think as our presidents are on board and our leadership group is on board, I think that we would be okay moving forward with it. Okay, thanks.
So I guess I was sort of dreading this meeting because it seemed like it was going to be so unpleasant. And I'm just a little surprised because it was seeming like such this huge amount of money we had to cut. And I had all these terrible thoughts in my head about everything we were going to have to get rid of for next year, which was not pleasant. But it seems like, I don't know if it's because you guys were able to juggle things or what, but it seems like there's not actually very many cuts for next year. Am I correct in that, thinking that?
You are correct in thinking that. but just know that in 21, 22, this really buys us time, Trustee Fernandez, to have a more thoughtful process. Because if things don't change over the summer or into the fall, in 21, 22, we are going to have to make significant reductions. And, you know, right now, through a variety of vacancies and use of one-time money, I feel comfortable doing it this way. And I had the same dread you had Friday afternoon until our chief business official called me and said, hey, look at this spreadsheet. And it just took me a bit because we're not used to using one-time money to solve ongoing problems. But I think under these circumstances, it makes a lot of sense. So I've gotten my head around it. And I think it makes sense for the fall, but we will anticipate figuring out in the fall for 21, 22, if things don't change, we are going to actually be looking at cutting programs and such.
And that's decision point number 3, but let's not forget decision point number 2, which we'll come up with in the next couple weeks, which on number 11 on your landscaped budget page, there is a $750,000 potential savings from CSG reductions. So this is based on finding $750,000 from the budget year that starts in 6 weeks. So there's still an opportunity to get really sad. I just wanted to give that to you, Trustee Fernandez.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome. Trustee Van Sant.
Given that this is the worst case scenario, is kind of what I understand, right? We've prepared the budget for the worst case scenario. Steve, is that correct? I mean, this is if.
Based on what we know today, yes, absolutely.
So this is if the feds give us no bailout at all.
Correct.
Which everyone thinks is unlikely.
Right.
So I guess what I'm wondering now is what's the process to restore, since this is probably the worst case scenario, and I agree with preparing for the worst case scenario, but how are you going to prioritize which positions you actually do fill, given that we probably won't have this terrible of a, I mean, who knows, could get worse, but if it doesn't end up this bad, what's the process for deciding what to restore?
Would that be a discussion that you might feel more comfortable presenting on Superintendent Cuban at our next meeting?
Sure, yeah, I don't need that now.
That would be lovely, President Lagarde.
Okay.
That is so optimistic of you, Trustee Van Sant.
I don't think it's actually that optimistic. I mean, even Steve would say this is the worst case scenario, and it was kind of, my understanding is Governor Newsom was throwing down the gauntlet to the feds, saying, "Fine, this is what it'll look like if you give us no money." So it's impossible. The feds are not going to give any money. So
and the 1.4 is not even in there, and that's much more for sure than even anything else that could come down the pike.
What is, and the what?
The 1.4 federal funding for additional academic and support. And we think that one's more likely than the next one, right?
I don't know.
We are definitely getting that funding.
Okay, so much more likely. I have a question about it based on one of our top 3 goals of the strategic plan of equity. I am concerned that there is I think a 1.0 position for a special education administrator that you're not planning on refilling. And of all the things that are presented, that's the one that gives me the most heartache because of all the difficulty of students who have had to adapt to online learning. I think we can all stipulate to the fact that children with special needs have had an even harder time than most other students. And we just put that position in a year or 2 ago because we realized that we were underserving that community of students, or at least that we could do a better job. And so I'm concerned about that. Could you address that a little bit?
Yes, we, if it makes you feel better, we have been unable to fill that position. We have been advertising for it, and we have not been able to find the right match for that position. And it's almost June. And so it's a really hard to fill position. And I'd like to revisit it again in the fall to see if that's something that we would want to fund in 21, 22 going forward. But we haven't filled it yet. we have been trying.
Trustee Fernandez?
I was also wondering about UISA because I don't know what the fall will look like. I would love it if all kids were back in classrooms full time, but I don't necessarily see that happening. And I'm wondering if there are going to be more families who want to keep their kids home and want to have basically independence. I mean, remote learning, which is basically like UISA, very similar to UISA. And if they don't have a principal position there, I'm wondering how that might impact it if we need to increase the number of teachers there because we have a greater demand with students.
We are planning for that. We've got a small subcommittee that's meeting about options for 2021, and we anticipate having more families that might request independent study or remote learning. And actually next week, we're going to send a survey out. It's a non-binding survey. So just to poll our parents on, these are potential options for next year. Which one would you choose, basically? So we can kind of get a ballpark idea about, is it, 10% more who would probably choose independent study or remote learning? What is the percentage? Because our thought, Trustee Fernandez, is to plan for that at each school site and not necessarily add more teachers, but use a teacher at the school site because enrollment might reduce in the school site of kids who might want regular on-site learning. And so we might deploy a teacher from that school site to serve those kids through independent study or remote learning. And so we're kind of looking at all that right now. We would still have a principal at UISA. We're looking at reconfiguring our admin team, and we would actually have an administrator at that school site.
So do you anticipate that being, they had 50%, right now?
They did, yeah.
Would that be a reduction or do you think they would have a 50%?
We would definitely have somebody dedicated to them 50%.
Okay.
We're working on some details around that I will share with you eventually. But they will still have a principal for sure.
Trustee Vincent?
So I want to ask a question, and I'm hoping this doesn't sound indiscreet, but given the environment we might have in the fall and that adults over the age of 65 are at higher risk for complications for COVID, would this be a time to offer a retirement incentive?
We should talk about that under, maybe we can have a closed session prior to our next special board meeting to discuss that.
Okay, I know usually when we talked about retirement incentive, we start much earlier in the year. This would be a fairly abrupt thing to do, but okay, let's talk about it closer.
But I would say as we consider layoffs for the future, it would be a good consideration to discuss.
Okay, I mean, we've done that before, not in, not unrelated to a pandemic, but we've definitely done retirement incentives in the past.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. We also talked with our bargaining presidents today about, do we need to look at adjusting the school calendar for next year? I mean, we're exploring a few things here and there. Just, it's hard to know if starting school later would allow us to go back to like normal on-site learning.
Yeah.
So anyway, we're having all those crazy discussions. And again, that's why this particular approach to the budget makes a lot of sense, because we just don't know yet.
Did you ask the question to the parents in the survey that you're giving about that initial opening start date?
We did not, but we haven't pushed it out yet. That would be a good question to add.
And I don't know, maybe it's more of a science health, public health officer question than it is a parent question. Do we think that starting 2 weeks later will allow us to have so flattened the curve that we will be more successful in grouping, 1,600 kids at Ukiah High by waiting, or do they not think that that's going to be medically significant? So maybe it's more of a question for them than it really is for the parents. I'm not sure.
That is good. And, the other thing is people are projecting that we're going to have a resurgence of COVID in October and November. So if we start later, are we going to have less time with our students? It's all of those unknowns.
Right.
I really don't like living my life in uncertainty. I'll just note. Where did Trustee Van Sant go? I'm sorry, Mulgard. President Mulgard has disappeared. So let me check on her.
I'm coming with you.
Oh, should I put my, you just go ahead and use mine.
Okay. Okay. Why, hello. I've always wanted to be Superintendent Deb Cuban, and now's my chance because I see it on the bottom that that's my name.
Do I have mute?
I don't know. I have no idea. No, Deb's not muted, is she? Can you hear me? Yes. Yeah, no, they're all nodding.
Okay.
They're all nodding. Okay, so just to wrap up here, this is for discussion and we can give direction to staff. So our direction to staff, if we follow this, is that we are using the 2-page strategic planning document that was mutually agreed upon through a very comprehensive and inclusive process. And then we would use this 2-pager here that we have that would prioritize our decision making. And then we would come back within a couple weeks to make a few funding decisions, but realizing that because of using one-time money and because of our larger savings account, we don't need to overreact and have huge changes for this upcoming school year. But then in the fall, we would be looking at up to 4.2 million, depending on what happens with the feds and other things. Is that a correct synopsis, Steve? Okay. Okay.
Yes, I believe so. Yes.
Okay, so let's hear some board reaction or concurrence. Trustee Van Sant?
I concur. But I also am wondering if at our next meeting, Deb could provide the list of unfilled positions that she's planning on not necessarily fulfilling, because I don't think that was part of our thing. And I'm on board with that strategy. I just don't have a good visual in my mind of which ones we're going to be leaving unfilled.
Good.
Which
And
actual ones, not the categories like this, because she said there's 2.5 SSCs. I don't really know all the unfilled positions.
And I would also ask her that on an ongoing basis, either at the board meeting or in a TGIF, to keep us apprised during the year as those decisions come to her and what her decision is on those, just so that we're kind of going along with it as it's happening.
Yeah, and she doesn't need to answer it now, but I guess I'm slightly confused about, would you not fly those positions until you're ready to fill them, or you would fly them and just not do the hiring? Like, I don't need that answer right now. I'm just trying to understand structurally how it works.
The short answer is we wouldn't fly them unless
You wouldn't even advertise them until you're ready to do
it
it.
have been flown as of today. And that, of course, that's not true because it's already happened, but in the future, we wouldn't fly them unless we were ready to.
Okay, thank you.
Other comments? Okay, so hearing none, we're going to proceed. Adelante. And Deb Ornelas will be in touch with us about our next meeting, so that everything is prepared for the June 18th meeting, which would be the adoption of next year's budget.
And could you take a vote on the policy document?
I can't. It's not agendized as a vote.
It's an action.
Where? Sorry, we are consulting our agenda. The agenda I saw said it was for discussion. I didn't see that it was an action item. So sorry about that. If it is an action item, then
It's listed as an action.
it's listed as an action item, but then it says discussion underneath
Yes.
it. Yeah. Okay, we can take a vote, which I question though. We can take a straw poll. It'll make me feel better. Those board members who are in favor of the prioritization as I just recapped it, could you let us know that you agree with that? So
I do agree with it.
Yes, 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 yes.
Yes.
Where did Trustee Barrett go? Oh, there's Trustee Barrett. And she's a yes as well. So we see all 7 thumbs up. Those of you who are only listening, you'll know. So yes, there is concurrence. Thank you very much. Any other final comments? Hearing none, we are adjourned and we will be in touch about the next meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a good evening, everyone.
Bye, guys.